Chapter 01. The snow was thick, too thick. It felt as if nature itself wanted to cover this meat grinder in a pristine white mantle, to hide the dead beneath a pure shroud. But there was no way to erase what had happened here. Corpses lay scattered among artillery craters and destroyed vehicles. My breath came out in visible puffs in the frozen air, clearly altered by having survived the massive artillery barrage that had slammed into the trenches. I advanced carefully, the worn AK-74 in my hands. It wasn't the ideal weapon, but it was what I could afford without paying generous bribes for American, European, or any weapon that had spent years gathering dust in an armory. My eyes were fixed on one thing. The Russian T-90M tank loomed like a cornered beast, its armor blackened by explosive impacts. The tracks were destroyed, and the engine hissed with an agonizing sound. But it was still dangerous. A wounded monster is still a monster. Hans, to hell with this. Let's finish them off and get back to the trenches. We're easy targets, yelled Yuri from my right, rifle aimed at the tank. Yuri was a broad man, a Ukrainian with a visceral hatred for the Russians, but also an unshakable loyalty to anyone fighting for his country. Calm down, Yuri, I replied in Ukrainian. My German accent was unmistakable, but after months on this front, no one mocked it anymore. If we rush, one of those idiots might blow our heads off from the hatch. We circled the tank, making sure no one was around it. I knew how the mind of a soldier under pressure worked. If I were inside, wounded and cornered, I'd rather take some enemies with me before going down. Hans? Are they still in there? Mykola called from our cover line. Probably, I said, looking toward the main hatch. But not for long. I struck the hatch with the butt of my rifle, making sure they heard me. Come out or we'll blow you up, I shouted in Russian. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a metallic clank. Yuri, get ready, I murmured. Yuri nodded, pulling out a smoke grenade and popping the pin. He threw it precisely through a slit in the tank. A few seconds passed, and dense gray fog began seeping through the openings. The hatch burst open, and a man shot out, coughing and disoriented. Before he could react, I knocked him out with a blow to the face. His body slumped onto the tank, unconscious. Another tried to escape less successfully. The second figure emerged with a weapon, firing blindly in our direction. I saw it coming, rolled to the side, returned fire in a burst toward where the shots came from, praying I didn't hit the tank's ammunition. A dull thud echoed inside. I had taken down one of the crew. A third came flying out, lunging at me with a knife. The move was desperate, clumsy. I grabbed his wrist, turned, and shoved him against the tank. The fight was short. Within seconds, the knife was in my hands, and he was on the ground, the blade buried in his throat and his eyes open. With the tank secured, we breathed a sigh of relief. We had paid dearly for this victory. Long minutes of relentless artillery fire that had my nerves shot, but capturing a T-90M was a godsend. According to my contract, I'd receive a hefty payout if I managed to bring it back behind our lines safely. We did it, Hans, said Yuri, clapping me on the back. Command's going to pay us a fortune for this. Maybe they'll even let us rest. Ja, the fortune is mine since I'm the fucking merc with the contract. But I'll make sure to share it. Drinks are on me, I said with a grin. Yuri smiled, revealing a grin missing 3 teeth. But just as I started thinking about lowering my head and going home once my contract was over, I heard the sound that always made me shiver. A buzz. Drone! Drone! Shouted Mykola, trying and failing to shoot it down. I snapped my head up and saw it rapidly approaching. A drone. My training kicked in instantly. Get down. Explosive drone, I yelled, shoving Yuri into the snow. I turned toward the tank, knowing it was the main target. The little device appeared in the sky, a black speck against the snow-white background. It moved fast, too fast. There was no time. Run, Hans, Mykola shouted. But I didn't make it. I slipped, still on the tank's roof, watching as the drone dove. So this is how it ends, I thought, watching everything in slow motion as the drone plunged straight into the tank. My last thought wasn't fear, it was rage. I had secured a massive victory. A huge reward was waiting for me. This wasn't fair. The explosion engulfed me in fire, then a bigger explosion. And then, everything went black. I didn't know what had happened. But just as I was ready to make peace with God, I mysteriously opened my eyes again. This can't be heaven. Not after everything I've done. Everything was blurry. I tried to look around, but I couldn't even turn my neck. My arms and legs wouldn't respond. Nothing would. Just my eyes. And even they weren't much help. Everything was a smear, shadows, and formless lights. Don't fuck with me. I survived but ended up paralyzed. I'd rather be dead. I tried to move, anything, something. But no. I was trapped. I could only blink and stare. Like the rest of my body wasn't even mine. Desperation set in. Fast. I felt like a wounded animal that couldn't even scream. Until I tried. I opened my mouth and let out a scream for help. Or so I thought. What came out was a sharp, short, strange squeal. A cry. A fucking baby's cry. I froze. Not that I could do much else, of course. I was already completely immobile. But this time it was from fear. I tried again. I wanted to say my name. Curse. Swear. Say something. Only more whimpers came out. Whiny. Weak. Repetitive. Annoying sounds. As I kept struggling with my throat and helplessness, I heard footsteps. Someone was coming. A female voice came closer. Her tone was gentle, almost affectionate. She was speaking German, yes, but with an accent off. Old-fashioned. Words I understood and others that didn't sound quite right, like they came from another era. The little Albrecht. You're hungrier than usual. Albrecht? What the hell is that? I'm Hans, damn it, woman. I screamed or tried to. All that came out was another infant's wail. Louder, more furious, just as useless. I fought my body again. Tried moving my arms, legs, head, anything. But something was holding me down. Tight. Like I was wrapped up. Every effort felt like trying to break free from inside a bag. Then I felt hands. One on my head. Another on my back. I was lifted with humiliating ease. Like I weighed nothing. The helplessness was unbearable. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't see clearly. It was like being buried alive. And then something was pushed into my mouth. Again and again. They forced it in, I spat it out. They pulled it out, shoved it back in. After a while, something warm began to flow. Milk. Milk? What the hell? My empty stomach growled. Aching. And without thinking, without choosing to, I started sucking. Instinct took over. A reflex. I don't know how long it lasted. I only know the hunger faded. And with that came the worst part, realization. Every time I tried to talk, baby noises came out. They called me by another name. They held me easily. They had put a nipple in my mouth to feed me. I was an infant, and yet I remembered everything. Years of miserable study to get a chemistry degree. The hell of living with my mother and her boyfriends, who only wanted to kick me out. The flooded job market. My 5 years in the Foreign Legion. And finally, when I finally got a decent mercenary contract in Ukraine. This happens. Well, looks like your wrappings came loose. We'll have to fix them. Not good for your posture, said the woman, her voice sweet, almost sing-song. She clearly cared for me. Wrappings? What the hell were they using those for? To immobilize me? On a baby? That wasn't just unusual, it was wrong. Deeply wrong. Wrapping up a newborn like that wasn't some cute old custom. It felt archaic, even barbaric. I froze again. My heart started to pound. My whole body tensed, even if I couldn't move it. No. This couldn't be happening. All the oddities I'd noticed started falling into place. The way they spoke. The strange German. The words I didn't recognize. The way they acted. The wrappings. Then, suddenly, I felt something give. The bindings, or whatever they were, slipped from my limbs. I thought I was imagining it. But no. My arms and legs were starting to respond. I stretched them with desperation. Frantic. Like a man who'd been trapped for years. In a way, I had. The sheer relief of feeling my muscles move, even as weak as they were, almost made me cry. The woman bent down again, ready to wrap me back up. But I wasn't going to let her. I fought back with everything I had. I kicked, flailed my arms, twisted, pushed her hand away with a clumsy but deliberate effort. It wasn't much, but for a newborn's body, it was a hell of a fight. I heard her sigh, mutter something under her breath, clearly frustrated. She tried again, and I resisted even harder. Again, pushed her away. One more time, I turned my body to the side. Finally, she let out a loud breath and left the room in a rush, almost running. Victory, I thought, but only for a moment. Seconds later, I heard more footsteps. 2 people now. One lighter and unsure. The other heavier, firmer. I can't wrap up young Albrecht. I'm afraid I'll hurt him. You know what his father does when a servant injures one of his children, the woman said, her voice trembling. I felt them coming closer. Of course, rough hand grabbed my arms with strength. This time there was no gentleness at all. I tried resisting again. I struggled, kicked, moved however I could, but the pressure only grew. They were binding me again. I screamed, cried in pure rage, not like a baby hungry for milk, but like a grown man trapped in the wrong body. But for them, it was just another tantrum. They squeezed me tighter. I could feel my chest being compressed. My stomach twisted. Breathing got harder, and then I vomited. Everything stopped. "Quick! We need to clean him up. We can't leave him like that," said the woman, flustered. "Shit! Give me something to wipe this," replied a deep voice, also uneasy. They scrambled around. I heard rushed movements, hands fumbling with the bindings, cloth falling to the floor, quick touches against what seemed like a table. Then the door slammed open. A loud crash, silence, and the presence of someone else. "What the hell are you doing to my son, you pair of incompetents?" roared a voice heavy with fury and command. No one answered. There was a long, suffocating silence. I heard the heavy steps getting closer, metal clinking with each movement. Something warm wiped across my mouth and nose, cleaning me. "My lord!" The woman's voice came out barely audible, shaken. "I didn't speak to you, woman," the man growled. "And you, I pay you to care for my son. And look what you do, you worthless idiot." I heard a scream, sounds of someone choking. "My lord, mercy!" cried the woman. "I couldn't put the wrappings on your son. He started crying and moving too much. I couldn't hold him. So that's what happened." The man muttered. I heard something heavy fall to the ground, followed by a deep gasp for air. The metallic steps came closer again. "A fighter already. Good. Don't bother with the wrappings. He doesn't like them," said the commanding voice, much calmer now. "But my lord, it's dangerous." The woman began. "I didn't ask you. I gave you an order. You obey, woman. Is that clear?" He snapped, raising his voice again. I didn't hear a reply, but it was obvious she gave one, likely with a nod. After that, they covered me with a few pieces of cloth, and I heard everyone leave the room. What a fucking insane day. Chapter 02. The rest of the following days was boring. I was trapped in this damn baby body and there wasn't much I could do. Breathe, consume oxygen, and turn milk into shit, basically. The woman came often to feed me. Occasionally, she tried to put the wrappings on me again, but she had already learned. If I made a loud enough fuss, she'd get nervous, mumble something, and leave the room in a hurry, probably still scared from the outburst the man, who seemed to be my father, had thrown at her. And meanwhile, there I was, just baby consuming oxygen. Shitting myself had become a daily routine. I couldn't do anything to stop it. No control over my bowels, bladder, or anything. I just felt it coming. And then it happened. Afterward, I had to endure someone cleaning me up like I was some useless sack of meat. A humiliating experience 3 times a day. Took me a while to get used to it. At first, every time it happened, I wished I had died for real. Most of the time I was confined to what seemed like a wooden crib. I could feel the bars with my fingers when I managed to stretch them out. Several days passed, or so I think, until my vision finally began to clear. At first, just less blurry shadows. Then shapes. Eventually, colors. And then I started to really see where the hell I was. The room was large, only meant to house a crib, some furniture, and a fireplace that was frequently lit to keep the place warm. The maid or a man would often come in to throw more firewood into the hearth. The woman who took care of me had stopped talking to me much since the incident with the bindings. Now she kept it minimal. Feed me, clean me, leave. She didn't say much, but with what little I observed, I managed to deduce something important. My family had status, or money, or even better, both. We had at least 2 servants, a room of my own, decent clothes, though uncomfortable, and that woman who cared for me like her life depended on it. Maybe, in all my fucking bad luck, I at least won the social class lottery. I'd been reborn, but this time it looked like I'd landed in the top 1%. Sounds nice on paper, until you realize that even someone with average income in the modern world lives far better than a medieval noble. Cold water, disease, superstition, and shitting yourself were all completely normal. So no, this wasn't exactly a prize, but within the bad, I was in the best position. Days passed quickly. I slept a lot, for obvious reasons. Each day I gained more control over this body, and it became much easier to move it at will. With time, I began noticing the patterns of those who entered the room. The servant who fed me came in several times a day, always nervous, always looking over her shoulder. A rough-looking man, wearing worn leather armor, kept watch over the room. Sometimes he stayed at the door. Other times he entered and tossed more firewood on the fire. And then there was him, a large man, imposing. He came only once a day. He would approach the crib silently, stand there, staring at me for several minutes, then cover me with a blanket and leave. He never spoke a word, but sometimes, when our eyes met, he would smile. That was how several days went by. Aside from those 3 people, no one else entered the room. I was completely isolated. Finally, after what felt like several days of repeating the same routine, the large man broke the pattern. He came at the usual time, with the same firm step and stern expression. But this time, he brought something with him. A wooden box. Without a word, he lifted me from the crib with more gentleness than I expected, and sat me on the floor on a thick blanket. It was the first time I'd been freed from that damned wooden prison. The floor was cold, hard, but I didn't care. It was freedom, even if only brief. He took out 4 objects from the box and placed them in front of me, one by one, in an almost ritualistic order. First, a small figurine of a dog. Then a rattle, simple but well-made. Next, a wooden warhammer. Small, but recognizable. Thick head, short handle, no decorations. And finally, a carved horse. Once everything was in place, he sat across from me, silent, watching me. But this time, it wasn't the same empty silence as before. This time he was expecting something, a decision. And it didn't take a genius to figure out what kind of answer he was looking for. He came in every day wearing armor, plate covering his chest, greaves on one leg only, red clothing underneath. It was a uniform. Everything about him screamed soldier. Now he was looking at me with those firm, calculating eyes, like he could read me. He didn't say it out loud, but the message for me was clear. Who are you going to be? The loyal dog? The soft child? The warrior? The noble horseman? Without thinking too much, I reached for the most obvious choice. The hammer. It was small, but it fit perfectly in my hand. The wood was rough but solid. As soon as I grabbed it, I looked up at him. He met my gaze. Serious, reserved, like something inside him was about to crack. He didn't smile, but he nearly did. Then he moved his hand, slowly, and pointed at the box again. He wanted more, a second answer. His intentions were crystal clear. Strength alone wasn't enough. He wanted to see what else I could be. I looked back at the objects and went with the logical choice. The horse. I grabbed it with my other hand and started moving it, as if playing trotting. The gesture was clumsy, but clear enough to be understood. I looked at him again. He let out a long, deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, I saw an expression I hadn't seen before: relief, pride. "Thank you, Sigmar, thank you," he murmured, barely audible, but with a wave of emotion that filled the room. And that's when everything clicked. Sigmar, Sigmar, no fucking way. A noble invoking Sigmar with that kind of devotion. That could only mean one thing. I was in the Empire, in the goddamn world of Warhammer fantasy. Even without seeing beyond this room, I knew it for certain. Out of all the possible places to reincarnate, this was one of the worst. Then again, at least it wasn't Warhammer 40k. Small consolation, barely avoiding one of the absolute worst fates. While I tried to process it, I felt the large man's hands wrap around me again. He lifted me with the same care as always and placed me back into the crib, as if I had just done something worthy of respect. For him, I probably had. For me, I was stuck somewhere between shock and terror. The realization hit harder than any explosion I'd experienced in combat. This wasn't just any fantasy world. Here, gods walked unseen. Whispers could twist your mind. Desires could summon horrors. In this place, if you felt too much, something might notice, and once it did, you were screwed. And here I was, a baby, defenseless, with a consciousness I couldn't turn off. An adult mind trapped in new, young, uncontrollable flesh. Vulnerable, and with a mental record that wasn't exactly clean. Rage. Lots of it. A whole life swallowing anger. I always wanted to climb, to control my own life. Excess. Drinking and violence. Corn, Slanish, even Sench if he focused on how much I schemed or my love for knowledge. I was a damn silver platter offering for the gods of chaos. The fear crept in like a disease. I started paying closer attention to everything. The ceiling, the shadows, the sounds behind the walls. I became paranoid. I waited for a whisper only I could hear. A deformed figure in a corner. A dream that didn't belong to me. But nothing came. And there wasn't anything I could do anyway. Too young to make decisions. Too weak to protect myself. Completely at the mercy of those caring for me. And if one of them was already marked, or if there was a crack in this household, I go down with them. Several hours must have passed before I finally calmed down. Nothing happened. No demonic apparitions. No twisted voices in my ear. No signs of corruption. Everything went back to the usual routine. The quiet room, the wooden crib, the same fire fading with the sunset. With time, the initial fear dulled. The paranoia didn't go away, of course, but it became part of the mental background noise. Just another silent alarm ringing in the distance. Days kept passing. The sun and moon crossed the window over and over, marking the rhythm of an infant's life that had nothing to do with my previous one. But unlike a normal baby, I didn't need to discover the world from scratch. I didn't have to crawl by instinct or learn how to move my fingers. I just needed to wait for the body to reach the minimum threshold for my mind to take over. It didn't take long. After a few weeks of patience, I regained full control of my limbs. At first, I crawled, clumsy and slow but with purpose. Then I managed to stand, holding onto the crib bars. My muscles responded. My legs trembled, but I didn't give up. The large man, the one who seemed to be my father, watched me with pride every time he saw me moving. He would smile, just barely, whenever I played with the hammer or the horse he had given me. But it wasn't an empty smile. It was genuine satisfaction at what he was seeing. He watched me closely. He expected things from me. In less than a month, I managed to control my lower body too. No more shitting myself like some damned animal. With a more stable body, I began escaping the crib. At first, I only tried when the maid or the guard weren't present. But soon I learned to slip out quietly, sliding through the bars and dropping carefully onto the blanket. If they heard me, the guard would catch me and put me back in without saying a word. The stone floor, though cold and hard, was far better than the soft mattress in the crib, which felt like it swallowed you if you stayed still too long. Down there, at least I could practice walking, balancing, measuring my steps. Time passed. I grew. I was already walking with some stability, even if I was still clumsy. My gums itched like hell, like something was tearing the flesh from the inside. Teeth were coming in, and it kept me in a bad mood constantly. But what really struck me was the lack of intellectual stimulation. No one tried to teach me how to speak. No one showed me symbols, letters, books. Not a single written word. Was it normal in this time period to wait so long before starting a child's education? I just needed to identify how the German I knew diverged from the Reichsspiel spoken here. That alone would be enough to begin mastering the language. I only needed to hear more natural conversations. If I managed that, I wouldn't take long to understand it fully, and if I could get my hands on a book, even better. Chapter 03. I don't know exactly how much time has passed. All I know is I've watched the sun and moon cross the same window more times than I can count. The weather changed. I went from relying on the fireplace almost constantly to not needing it at all. The cold slowly disappeared, and the air in the room became drier, lighter. That tells me at least several months have gone by. But beyond that, nothing else has changed much. The routine is still the same. Wake up, eat, shit myself, although less often, observe, walk, sleep. Day after day. The maid, the same quiet, nervous woman, started coming less often. They didn't feed me just milk anymore. Now there were tasteless, thick, warm porridges. Bland, but at least something. And so it continued. Until one day, without warning, things changed. My father, armed as usual, wearing his metal breastplate, greaves on one leg and red clothes, entered the room, lifted me in his arms, and for the first time we left. I passed through the door that had kept me locked for so many months. The journey was long, descending what seemed to be a tower, steep stairs, uneven steps built in strange proportions. No one could walk there without watching every foot placement. Along the way, I saw dozens of new faces, servants, guards, heads bowed at my father's passing. No one dared look up. Not as many as I expected, but enough to know we were in a place defined by hierarchy. Finally, we stepped outside. It wasn't exactly a castle in the usual sense, but a fortified tower, tall, robust, with attached buildings and an exterior stone wall. From where I stood, I couldn't see much, but the fresh air hit me like a wave, and for a moment, I simply breathed. We continued and soon reached what looked like a training yard. A dozen or so men-at-arms practiced swordplay, controlled duels, lunging, blocking each other's cuts without killing. Some wore shields, others partial armor, filling the space with the clang of steel and impacts against shields. "So this is your new offspring, my lord," said a man approaching loudly, clad in chainmail and a dusty doublet. He removed his helmet with a sigh, gesturing toward a wagon that had just passed through the fortress gates. "Yes, Rudolph, unlike the others, I have high hopes for this one," replied my father without looking at the knight, eyes fixed on the training field. He tracked one soldier's every stroke, every step, every mistake. "And how did it go this time?" "You'd have to ask the scout for the full report. But there are issues, nothing nice, honestly. It strikes me as odd so many beastmen are moving toward the same village. Not their usual behavior, but luckily we intercepted a group before they did much. They only managed to kill a couple of livestock heads, so you could say it went well, for now. But their presence will likely linger before they move on again." "How many were there?" my father asked sharply, turning as though expecting a number to confirm his worst suspicions. "Many. Too many for what's typical in this region. But they stayed in the woods, didn't cross the river. As I said, they didn't accomplish much." Rudolph hesitated but was cut off by my father. "One of those ungrateful dogs must have fathered a malformed cub and kept it hidden. You know well such things attract beastmen like flies to carrion. When we go there, we'll have to give those bastards a clear reminder of what happens when the laws are disobeyed." Rudolph nodded silently, his gaze dropping to the ground. "And what about your new wife? Is she well, my lord?" the knight asked awkwardly, glancing quickly at me. "What would I know?" my father grunted. "That damned woman gave birth and ran off with her father. Good riddance. I don't have to hear her anymore asking for dresses, perfumes, Altdorf fabrics. I thought I married her to spoil her. She forgot the only reason I lowered myself to take a commoner was for her dowry. I wouldn't have sullied my bloodline otherwise, but I needed gold for the mine." "You managed to get the Emperor's permissions to exploit the mountains?" asked Rudolph, mixing curiosity with respect. "Yes, cost me more than it should have. I had to bribe half the nobility to get an audience with Luitpold, then almost emptied my coffers to offer suitable tribute. But I succeeded. Now I hold the mining rights for the entire stretch of the Grey Mountains, from the wastelands to Eilhart. It's all mine, as long as I pay the Emperor his due, of course." My father's voice rang with pride as he gazed toward the mountains just visible in the distance. "And what about, the vampires?" Rudolph asked, lowering his tone as though he feared even speaking the name. "Bah, stories. Tales to scare children and superstitious peasants. I'm disappointed you believe in them, Rudolph." My father snorted. "Here we deal only with what can be seen, weighed, and exploited. They've already found veins of iron. With Sigmar's blessing, soon we'll discover something more valuable, and that wealth will fill my coffers. When that happens, we'll end this ridiculous dispute with the von Kesselheims once and for all. Rainsfeld is mine by right." My father continued speaking, and I listened closely, not just for the content but for the rhythm and tone. I was beginning to notice patterns in the Reichsspiel. Many words were the same as the German I knew. Others differed but were easy to deduce from context and pronunciation. It felt like hearing a blend of archaic dialect and regional variation. If they continued speaking like this every day, it wouldn't be long before I could speak it fluently. "So what about Heinrich? I see him training here, but wasn't he serving as squire too?" Rudolph began, in a friendly tone, but didn't finish his question. My father's reaction was instant. "That good-for-nothing," he spat through clenched teeth. He fell asleep reading books and failed his duties as squire. And when he was supposed to accompany his lord into the forest, he refused. Why? Because he was scared. He was scared. Do you realize that? He paused, each word dripping with resentment. Damn it. You know the humiliation it was for me to get my son serving one of the Count von Haldenfels's heirs. An opportunity like that doesn't come twice. But no. He couldn't be like Wilhelm. My father lowered his voice, but not his rage. Wilhelm was the perfect heir. Squire of the Reichsguard, strong, disciplined, almost finished with his training, and he had to die so, pitifully, in a tavern in Altdorf, shot dead by some miserable drunks. A stupid brawl, a badly placed stab, and Heinrich. He nodded toward the training yard, as if the sight alone disgusted him. Heinrich isn't even his shadow. He's a woman in a man's body, soft, cowardly, a useless bookworm hiding behind excuses. We can still teach him courage, my lord. It's not too late, suggested Rudolph carefully, choosing his words. Besides, you shouldn't speak so harshly of your heir. Only 2 of your 8 children remain. More claimed their lives because they were born weak. They died of the first fever. There's nothing to be done with fragile offspring, father replied, without a trace of pity. Then he looked at me, holding me firmly. But I have high hopes for Albrecht. He adjusted me in his arms. Really? Well, he seems healthy, said Rudolph politely, watching me. Carefully, my father set me down on the floor in front of him. Come on, Albrecht. Show him why you're my son, he said, pride and expectation in his voice. Supporting myself with my hands on the cold stone floor, I stood up with minimal effort. My body responded smoothly. I took steady steps toward him, balanced without faltering. I stopped right in front of his boots and looked up. Father, I said, my voice clear though slightly thin. I knew I was playing my role, and I did it gladly. His reaction was audible. Ha! Even better, he said, joy in his voice. Where'd he learn that? Probably some talkative servant. He added, his tone showing no doubt, only satisfaction. Impressive. When was he born? Asked Rudolph, surprised, observing me anew. During the last harvest-tide, father replied. He's been astonishing me. This one is a growing warrior. I won't make the mistake I did with Heinrich, letting his mother educate him. But then again, my dear wife lies dead, and this commoner I took to replace her shows no interest in raising the child to age 7. So from now on, he's under my strict care. He began walking toward the training field, with Rudolph and me following. Before we ride off to deal with that beast-men problem, I want you to bring your son along. Even if he's young, it's best they start getting used to each other now. Tell the other knights too when they return with taxes. The sooner they learn their place, the better, don't you think? Of course, my lord. That won't be a problem. They'll all be eager for our children to train together. Have you arranged a tutor for him? Asked Rudolph, his tone genuinely interested. I spent a year's income on a good tutor from Altdorf for Heinrich, and what did I get? A sissy? My father spat, suddenly raising his voice. Hold that sword properly and fix your stance. You're an embarrassment, he screamed at the young man training alone. My brother, by what I just heard, bowed his head in silence. So I've decided to leave him in the hands of a Sigmarite priest, father continued, glancing at Rudolph for approval. Ah, well, I suppose that's a good idea. But Rudolph hesitated, scratching the rim of his helmet still in his hand. Weren't they the ones who educated you? And you yourself said, you know, reading and writing were never your strong suits. So what? You can leave him with a chaplain. It's not essential. I'd rather he know how to wield a sword than a pen. It's far safer to kill a bandit with steel than with words, replied father, sarcasm in his voice. I saw uncertainty flash across Rudolph's face. Maybe he thought, by linking his son with me, he could ensure a proper noble education. But not with this man as father. A man who seems to despise teachers, books, and anything that doesn't involve yelling or wielding something sharp wouldn't allow that. Father returned his attention to Heinrich, screaming corrections at every position, every movement, every tiny mistake in how he held the sword, hips, grip, elbows, openings in his guard. Every misstep triggered another barrage of orders, demands, and comparisons. Heinrich staggered, gasped, but said nothing, until he collapsed. His knees gave out. The sword hit the ground with a hollow thud. He managed to stay upright for a few seconds, then fell to his knees. My father looked at him with disgust, as if he'd seen a pig trying to walk on 2 legs. Without another word, he scooped me up and turned. Then he walked back into the tower. Soon after, I was back in my room. My prison. Chapter 04. My life took a radical turn. I thought I'd return to the usual routine, locked all day in that familiar room. But that didn't happen. Suddenly, more often than I expected, I found myself outside the castle, watching the men-at-arms train. It wasn't just a stroll anymore. It became part of a new routine. They'd seat me on a blanket or a small bench, always under the watch of a servant or guard, and from there I could see the whole training field. Swords, shields, shouted commands, sweat, punishments. It was repetitive, but informative. I quickly noticed that the number of men had decreased significantly. Nothing like that first time my father brought me personally. The field felt emptier, the shouts fewer, duels more spaced out, and soon I learned why. Father had disappeared. He left days ago. No goodbye, no explanation. He just went, apparently to deal with the problem of the beastmen that he'd discussed with Rudolph that day. He took many fighters from the fortress with him, probably to cleanse the forests, patrol villages, or hunt those beasts menacing the peasants. With him went the horses, squires, and banners. Silence descended on the fortress, but not for long. This apparent freedom ended soon enough because the one who would be my teacher finally arrived, the Sigmar priest from the village temple. He didn't fit my expectations of a religious man. I'd pictured long robes, amulets, solemn words, white beard. Yes, he wore a robe and bore the twin-tailed comet symbol. But he also wore chainmail, hardened leather armor, and had a warhammer at his belt. I suppose for someone who worships a warrior god, that presentation made more sense than I'd admit. The priest took my hand, firm but gentle, and with 2 guards guiding me, he made me walk. He was taking me on my own toward the village along a long beaten dirt road descending from the castle. For the first time, I saw the village up close. And, well, I can't say I was surprised. Most of the buildings were rough-cut wood with no real windows, just holes likely patched with cloth or boards in winter to hold in the little warmth they had. The place smelled of smoke, mud, and bodies working beyond what a human body should endure. Only a handful of buildings had stone at their base or corners, slightly sturdier houses, probably belonging to wealthier artisans or a local official. I couldn't be sure, but you could tell who lived above the rest. We passed what appeared to be a carpenter's workshop. Adults were busy cutting and assembling wood while several children, not much older than me, carried boards, searched for nails, or helped hold up structures. Clearly, they weren't learning in a modern sense, they were working. A few steps later, I spotted a blacksmith's forge. The hammer's ring against anvil never stopped. Constant, rhythmic, deafening, and the heat was brutal even from several meters away. As we passed, I saw a smith, arms blackened by soot and sweat, barking orders while more children hauled coal, metal, and rough iron pieces. Practice materials, presumably. Finally, I noticed the only stone building in the village, apart from the fortress, the Sigmar Chapel. And unlike everything around it, no expense had been spared here. Well-cut bricks with firm mortar, perfectly laid tiles with none loose, arches with stained glass windows, simple but catching daylight beautifully. It contrasted almost absurdly with the rest of the village. Splintering wooden homes, thatched roofs, poorly nailed boards. It was like they'd ripped out a piece of city and planted it in the mud. The chapel stood in the center of the village, and directly in front was what really caught the eye, a statue of Sigmar. The figure was imposing, light gray stone, taller than any house in the village, depicted in classic form. Muscular, heavily bearded, brow furrowed in serene wrath. He wore chainmail with plate tassets, a cape that looked wind-blown despite being carved in stone. But what drew the eye was the warhammer he held in both hands, Galmaraz, not raised in attack, but planted firmly on the ground, like judgment incarnate, waiting for judgment to fall. The priest continued guiding me by the hand until we finally entered the chapel. As expected, the interior was fully decorated in homage to his god. Banners bearing the twin-tailed comet hung from pillars, stained glass depicted scenes of battle and miracles, and behind the altar stood another statue of the god, smaller, but equally stern. Other children were already there, likely the sons of knights and minor officers under my father's command. Only those who, by blood or position, could earn the privilege of being educated by a Sigmarite priest. Privilege, that is, to listen to imperial theology burned into your soul, defining what you must be and what you can never question. And with that, the sermon began. The priest stepped up to the small stone pulpit. Despite his age, his voice was strong, clear, hardened by years of battle and preaching. He looked at us each with intensity before speaking. Children of the Empire, children of Sigmar, listen well to what your God expects of you. He paused, inhaled, and spoke as though each word was a commandment. Be strong, for the weak have no place in this world. The weak die, and with them the empire perishes. Be brave, for fear is no excuse for inaction. Cowardice is the crack through which corruption enters. Be loyal, not only to your father and your land, but to Sigmar who created this civilization. Betrayal is the seed of chaos, and destroy evil wherever you find it, without doubt, without remorse, without wavering in blade or judgment. For evil does not reason. Evil does not negotiate. Evil must be crushed, annihilated, eradicated. It went on like that for what felt like an eternity. Words and more words about what Sigmar expected from us. Strength, discipline, courage, faith, devotion, purity, obedience, justice, fire, death. All the other children stared fixedly at the priest, as if every word was a revelation. Maybe some understood. Maybe others were too afraid to look away. I simply complied. I nodded. I feigned interest. Inside, I wanted to die from how damn predictable and boring it all was. It felt like reading military propaganda mixed with a poorly edited medieval sermon. Dressed up in dramatic, repetitive tones that probably worked on half-literate peasants or proud nobles who dared not ask questions. Finally, with a loud fist pounding on the stone pulpit, the priest ended the sermon. The echo rolled through the chapel like a dry thunderclap, marking the end of the punishment. But just when things seemed over, here begins your first lesson, children of the Empire. Here, in this place, under the watchful gaze of the god Sigmar, you will witness the story of his most faithful son, Magnus the Pious. With that, he took a heavy leather-bound book, well worn at the edges, and placed it on a low table before us. It will be my duty to teach you to read the story of this sacred man. To my genuine surprise, the priest actually started teaching us to read. It wasn't elaborate. He used the basics. Letters, syllables, connectors. We repeated syllables, words, simple phrases, the minimal literacy needed for an imperial child to read Sigmarite writings without committing accidental heresy. The catch was simple. If you didn't get it right on the first try, tough luck. This priest had no interest in repeating himself. He didn't shout at first, it came later, but he made it clear that anyone who didn't learn quickly would be left behind. And if you failed to read correctly in front of the group, he'd take you through a verbal hell until you could pronounce every word, every title, every sacred name perfectly. The older children did okay, reading slowly, stumbling over phrases but figuring out the text with effort. The younger ones, around 2 to 4 years old, barely even a full year old in my case, couldn't even manage a complete sentence. They babbled, stuttered, some couldn't identify letters. A complete mess. When it was my turn, I expected the same, some public humiliation like the others. But not at all. He was gentler with me, perhaps because of my age, perhaps because he expected nothing. He simply pointed to a passage and asked me to say the name Magnus out loud. Normally, I'd have done just that. Comply. Don't stand out. But I had a father to impress, a brother who'd already failed, and a future I'd rather be lord of the castle than the spare. So I chose to do more. I took a breath, forced my still-developing throat, and read straight from the text. I can see in your eyes that you fear this enemy. I can see in your eyes that you wonder how we can fight such terrible monsters. Men of the Empire, I have the answer. We fight them with our steel, we fight them with our courage, but above all we fight them with our faith in Sigmar. My phrasing wasn't perfect. A few words stumbled. I struggled with the rhythm, but I didn't stop. When I finished, I looked at the priest. He looked genuinely pleased. He didn't say anything, just nodded once and moved on. After that, the children were retrieved one by their servant. The knight's children accompanied me back, led by the priest. As we climbed the slope back toward the tower, I took the chance to examine the fortress from outside. It wasn't as large as I imagined from within, but its height and position dominated the village. The stone was gray. The walls bore signs of recent repairs, suggesting not-so-distant conflicts. On the battlements, a few guards strolled listlessly, likely bored by the relative peace. From then on, visits to the Sigmar chapel became a daily routine. Every day for several hours, the priest returned to teach letters, connectors, simple phrases, and always with the book of Magnus the Pious. We read it over and over, each aloud, while the priest corrected or scolded as needed. It wasn't hard for me. Having mastered French, English, Ukrainian, and Russian in my previous life, this dialectal variation of German, Reichsspiel, posed no barrier. Felt familiar, even comfortable. Within weeks, I was reading fluently. Occasionally, the priest let me stay longer than the others. He'd sit me alone with the book and step away to write or clean the altar. In his way, I think he believed he was doing me a favor, or he saw me as an exceptionally devoted child. He didn't realize that for me, this was 1,000 times more interesting than watching sweaty men swing sticks all day. In time, the priest began teaching me to write. But there was a problem. Paper was expensive and scarce. He couldn't give me parchment just for me to ruin with crude scribbles. So he used moments when he himself had to write, likely letters for nobles, the castle, or the religious order, and let me watch closely. He pointed out the strokes, the symbols, how to hold the pen, how to dip it, how not to drip ink. I figured all of this would serve me well in the future. Chapter 05. Father didn't return until several months later. He came back after what seemed to be a successful campaign to cleanse the forests. He brought with him new trophies, more dead beasts, and an air of victory in every step. But I never knew exactly what happened out there. Obviously, no one discussed real matters in my presence. I had too many things to do. Most of the day I had to spend watching the training of the men-at-arms. They sat me near the field so I would listen to the shouting, the clashing swords, the orders, the footsteps, the insults. Also that, according to them, I would start becoming familiar with the sounds of war. Then I had to go to Sigmar's chapel, where the daily lessons continued. They weren't of much use anymore. Since I had completely mastered Reichsspiel, the only remotely useful part was observing the writing sessions when the priest drafted letters. Sometimes he spoke aloud while doing it, which allowed me to learn the formal structure of imperial missives, the greetings, the titles, the seals, the tone. The rest was repetition. And finally, the day ended in a room of the castle where several children my age were gathered. They were the sons of Father's knights and of the most distinguished men at arms. It was supposed to be a time for playing, of course. But the real purpose was to build loyalty bonds from childhood. To force friendships that would later become alliances or influence networks. It wasn't hard to notice how some fathers who were present as guards made gestures to their children so they would approach me. Sometimes they simply took them by the hand and left them in front of me, with an awkward smile, as if that was enough to forge a connection. The games were the typical ones for small children. Wooden pieces, little carved soldiers, toy swords, crude dice. But for me, it was unbearable. Having to pretend I was having fun. Enduring so many loud and clumsy children around me. Acting like this was natural, when it wasn't. It was like having to watch cheap theater every day, and being forced to perform in it. That was the routine for several months. Time passed relatively quickly. Maybe because there were more things to do than simply staring at the ceiling of the room. My daily schedule kept revolving around fake education, passive training, and forced social games. The only real interruptions to that monotony were the religious festivals, celebrated every now and then in the village. There weren't many, but when they came, everything stopped. But beyond that, nothing distracted me too much from the usual. Weeks became months, and the months passed just the same as always. Training that wasn't really training, classes that no longer taught me anything, pretend games with children who could barely form a sentence without drooling. And so, my 4th birthday arrived, approximately, if what Father said about my birth was accurate. As I had already become used to, no one celebrated my birthday. It wasn't strange. In these lands, birthdays weren't something to celebrate, unless you were rich enough to afford a banquet, hire musicians, or hand out bread to the peasants. My father wasn't in a position to spend on that, not now, not with his pockets tight from the heavy investments in the Grey Mountains mines. Extraction of or had already begun in some areas, and every coin went to tools, workers, sentries, protection. Celebrating the birthday of a 4-year-old wasn't on the list of priorities. But I did receive a gift, one very different from what any other child would expect. And of course, it was also a test. One of the things our fief produced was war horses, since apparently there was a herd in some village, and ever since my family took control of Rainsfeld 4 generations ago, they had been producing good horses sold among the local nobility. My father took me to the training yard and, without saying a word, pointed to the corral. There she was, a young mare, light brown coat, nervous with twitching ears. You could still tell she had been weaned recently, small but strong. "She's yours now," he said without looking at me. "Your steed. You'll learn to ride her. And more importantly, to care for her." He gave me no further explanation. From that day on, the mare became entirely my responsibility. It wasn't enough to climb on her back. I had to learn how to feed her, clean her, keep her calm, understand when she was nervous and why. A stable boy explained the basics to me, but didn't help much. They saw it as part of my education, a necessary step. Another task. I had no intention of climbing on her right away. I knew very well that falling off a horse, even a young one, could be more than just a bump. One wrong move and you'd fall badly. And break your neck. Or a rib. I think there are a lot of historical references about important people who died from falling off horses. The mare wasn't trained. She barely tolerated anyone approaching. She wasn't aggressive, but neither was she trusting. She moved her head nervously and stomped the ground with one of her hooves if someone stared at her for too long. So I started the proper way. I went to see her every day, before and after my other duties. I brought food, grains of wheat, carrots when I could find them, slices of apple. I stood in front of her without getting too close, left the food on the ground, crouched and waited. Sometimes she ignored me. Sometimes she looked at me with those dark eyes that say everything without saying anything. But she didn't run. With time, I began talking to her. No nonsense. I told her about what I saw, the absurd classes, the training sessions, what I thought about all this. It didn't matter if she didn't understand the words. The calm tone, the steady rhythm. That she did understand. Days went by, then weeks. She now let me stroke her neck without moving or tensing. Later, she allowed me to touch her back and eventually her muzzle, though I always did so cautiously at first. I breathed slowly, made no sudden movements, and always kept my voice low. I talked to her while doing it, as if that might soothe her, or at least get her used to my presence. When she no longer pulled away or turned her head suspiciously, I began brushing her coat. I used the old brushes from the stable, worn from use, but still good enough to remove dust and dirt. Sometimes I did it after training with the other children, before going to the chapel, or at the end of the day, when there was barely any light left in the sky. She no longer looked at me with distrust. She already recognized me each time she saw me approach. She would bring her muzzle closer, slightly shake her head, and remain still while I moved around her. I no longer had to talk to her as much. The bond was already formed. Fortunately, Father didn't pressure me too much. I saw him sometimes from the yard or from one of the high castle windows, always silently watching. He said nothing, but it was clear he was observing every step, every bit of progress. I suppose seeing how I handled the mare convinced him he didn't need to push me. He knew I'd do it, but at my own pace. And so, when I felt it was reasonably safe, the time came. I put on the saddle they had given me weeks before. It was good quality, though clearly modified for training. No stirrups. A direct order from my father, according to what the stable boy explained to me. Your lord says that if you don't learn to ride using only your legs, you'll become too dependent on the stirrups. So you'll have to learn without them, said the boy as he helped me up. The mare grew restless as soon as she felt the change in weight. She stepped sideways abruptly, tossed her head in discomfort, and for a moment I thought she might lose control. But she already knew me. I spoke to her as I always did, in a low, firm, steady tone. My hands touched her neck right where I knew it calmed her. She settled again. Nothing more was needed. The stable boy took the reins and began guiding her around the yard. A short route, slow, barely a controlled trot. I squeezed my legs as tightly as I could. I leaned slightly forward to match the rhythm. The movement was rough, uneven. I had to adjust my balance with every step. And that's how I spent most of the day. Riding, squeezing my thighs hard, correcting my balance with every step. Every minute was exhausting, and although I didn't show it, my legs trembled with every lap we took around the yard. Finally, the Sigmarite priest arrived. The stable boy helped me down, and I walked toward him with unsteady steps, my legs trembling as I walked. But before I could leave with him, as I did every day, Father stepped closer. Blessings of Sigmar, priest of the warrior god. I would like to ask how everything is going with my son's education, said my father, with a respectful tone, more than I was used to hearing from him. Blessings of Sigmar, honorable son of the empire, replied the priest, slightly bowing his head. Your son displays knowledge far beyond that of his peers. I do not err in saying Sigmar has a great future in store for him. He will not disappoint when the time comes to fight the evil that corrupts these lands. His reading skills have truly amazed me, and I've even taught him to write. This boy has managed to memorize large parts of the life of Magnus the Pious. I saw Father's chest swell with pride. Standing out had paid off. Perfect. Then I believe it would be ideal for him to stop attending the chapel, he said, now with a smile stretching across half his face. He should focus on mastering skills that will serve him in the future. Now that he's begun riding, I think it's better for him to practice that instead of continuing to perfect something he's clearly already mastered. The priest frowned slightly. I would advise against that. Your son has a gift. He could have a great future among the servants of Deus Sigmar, especially considering he is your second son, not your heir. To waste his talent simply to make him a replacement for his brother would be a great mistake. He could have a true destiny in divine service, he said with a serious voice. I take your recommendation into account, priest, but the one who is my heir is not even worthy of carrying my name. All my hopes are in him. Father spoke with gravity. I don't need another book lover in the family. I believe he already has the skill needed to manage his noble duties in the future. I thank you for your work, priest. Father paused briefly, then added, I'll make sure your chapel receives a generous donation for your time. You've done a great job with him, but now it's time for him to begin preparing his body to serve Sigmar by protecting these lands and eliminating any abomination that dares set foot on them. The priest lowered his head slightly, saying nothing more, and with that the matter was settled. The priest finally withdrew, and Father looked at me intently. Come, Albrecht, to the horse. You see, when I have to send you as a page to another house, you must already have mastered the skill of riding, or you'll disgrace me. Like your brother, said Father, nodding toward the mare. I nodded silently and walked toward the corral. The stable boy was already waiting for me, and with his help, I mounted again.